Surachanee, Sriyai.
Okay. Wait, I don't know, it's this weird system.
Can you do the microphone also? Because I think it looks weird when I do it.
That should work now.
Screen?
Yeah. 8 people watching so far. Share. Okay. You guys are live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome to Thisrupt Talk, episode 15. We're going to talk about the Ratsadon's movement's social media revolution. Now, just to preface this episode, the new millennial came with a new form of revolution, right? In the 2010 to 2012, we had the Arab Spring, and then we had Euromaidan from 2013 to 2014. We have the Hong Kong protests going on right now, started in 2019, and also really it went back all the way to 2014. Also, we had the PDRC movement, PDRC, People's Democratic Reform Committee, which I did not know was a social media revolution until Dr. Surachanee told me. And now we have Ratsadon movement 2020. So today we're going to analyze social media revolutions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Remember, the history of social media revolutions have not ended well. Arab Spring, for example, look at Libya, look at Syria, so on and so forth. Euromaidan was a success, but that's because the Ukraine was in the middle of the NATO alliance and Mother Russia. So NATO had a hand in interfering with the political situation, and therefore they were able to have reform, change, and democratic election. Hong Kong, on the other hand, on the one side in China, and then you have the Hong Kong protesters, no one is likely to interfere, nor should they. Thailand also is the same thing. No outside force is likely to interfere unless you ask some of the royalists who are saying that they're interfering right now, but it won't be anything like NATO lending a hand. So it's pretty much between the Thai government and the Ratsadon movement. And right now, the war is raging on social media. It's about propaganda, it's about information. But before we get there, I would like for you, Dr. Surachanee, thank you for being with us from Chulalongkorn University. When we spoke earlier, right, we spoke about Ratsadon and social media, but then you told me it actually started with the PDRC in 2013, 2014. Would you like to briefly explain that?
Yeah, of course. So that was actually my dissertation. I studied the movement of the PDRC, and that was the first time that the social media has become a crucial part in mobilizing protests in Thailand, right? So it started off sometime in November of 2013. That's when they opened the first Facebook page, right? And then, they started doing their operation. And this is such a classic playbook of social movement that they used, right? They started off with creating public awareness about the government scandals, right? The Jamnam Khao, right? Situation, and pretty much trying to create the public awareness about why the government is bad, why the Thaksin legacy is bad, and they want to get rid of it.
So the specific issues were the rice pledging scheme under the election of Wat Thai government, and also the bill to the amnesty bill that the Thai MCs tried to push at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the people thought that the purpose of the bill was to be able to allow Thaksin Shinawatra to come back.
Yes, and they start trying to get people on board, trying to make people pay attention on the issue, right? And then after that, they started mobilizing.
Right.
They started mobilizing people, say that they would come out on the street. And personally, I think that partially the reason why the Gopapa was so successful in bringing people out was because of the policy, the digital policy and cyber policy in Thailand during the time. It's partially, it's quite, relatively speaking, quite progressive in comparison to right now.
Can you elaborate on that? How are they benefiting from those policies?
Well, because during that time, the government was more interested in expanding access of the internet everywhere in the country, right? So I guess in a way they didn't think that the social media and internet would be used to trigger anti-government sentiments, right? So in terms of surveillance, monitoring, censorship, it's a lot lower than it is now. It was a lot lower now.
So the movement was able to spread mainly through Facebook.
Yes.
And supporters of the movement were mainly Bangkok middle and upper classes who were into Facebook at the time.
Yes.
Facebook now is not like Twitter, but at the time Facebook was the social media platform. Now it's Twitter and Twitter, is that such a thing? No, sorry. TikTok.
Yes.
So on and so forth. Okay, so they were successful in using social media to mobilize the people, and then one thing led to another. The government decided to dissolve parliament, to have a fresh election. That's the way to solve problems in the democracy. However, the movement did not back down, obstructed the election. There were violence, so on and so forth, and voila, a man named General Prayut Chan-o-cha stepped in a military coup d'etat under the pretext of saving Thailand from chaos and violence. And 6 years later, here we are. General Prayut is still in charge. General Pravit is a leader of Palang Pracharat, so on and so forth. Now, this current Ratsadon movement, before this, there was a criticism against the youth movement, the young people. You are only on social media. You are never in the street. It's only a social media thing. But then they started to come out to the street, starting in February, and then COVID happened, and then they came out again in July. And ever since, they have not stopped coming out. And the way they have been able to come out is through social media mobilization. Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, so on and so forth. So from social media into the street. Now the question is, are they doing anything different from the Gopapa song?
What I see that they're doing differently is the way they coordinate in terms of the message that they use. Well, partially probably because, one thing I also want to mention is the concept called opportunity structure.
Okay.
Right. So opportunity structure theoretically talks more about what you're dealing with, right? That would form the opportunity and how you form your strategy, both at the government side and at the protest side, right? Activist side, movement side, right? So this interplay between the strategy of the government and the strategy of the protester kind of boils down into what we're seeing right now, right? The way that the movement form their message or craft their message, or the way they mobilize and coordinate through social media. That all comes from the opportunity structure that changes over time.
Right.
Right. So what I'm seeing that they're doing differently is particularly the way they use code language.
Okay, that's interesting. Code language. For example?
Like Gan Pei Po, right?
Which in English is silent.
What would it be in English? Trick the police?
Trick the police.
การเทโพโนเท in Thai วัยรุ่น slang is like dumb, like getting rid of, dumb. เทไม่เทมันประมาณแบบlike
English please. Okay, let me just sum it up.
dumb แหละประมาณ dumb.
It's like dumping something on the authority, and Chon being the youngest person here is more familiar with the language of the young. Thank you very much.
Right? Or the CIA.
So everything begins with the word gang, which comes from clan.
Yeah.
Clan is to pick on somebody, to bully somebody, to play a trick on somebody.
Yeah.
And then you gang this and gang that and gang.
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
things.
So they had to use code word to circumvent the surveillance or the censorship
Right.
that's going on online.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's quite interesting things that they are doing right now.
Okay.
Mhm.
And they have been
Effective.
successful so
Yeah,
far,
pretty
have they
effective.
not?
Yes, definitely.
What are the things that they may have done better? Or are they doing a wonderful job already in terms of social media strategy to mobilize?
I like the way they use infographics
Uh-huh.
in terms of keeping things short and concise,
Right.
right? And that's
Mhm.
what you need when you're going through social media strategies, is because honestly people have shorter and shorter attention spans nowadays, right? So it's really important to be short and concise and get to the message, right? And I think that's what in terms of the message, that's what they're doing quite well.
One thing that struck me as interesting is going back to Kopoposo 2014, even though they use social media and Facebook, things seem to be planned for the longer term. It takes more time for people to come out. Messages, rallies, so on and so forth will come out days ahead. However, with the Ratsadon movement, it seems many times they announce a protest. 2 hours later,
They're
the
more
street
into
is
flash mob strategy.
flash mob, but then 2
right?
hours later, the street is filled with thousands of people. How is that possible? Are the people just watching on social media the whole time, waiting for them to announce? Can you shed some light on this?
My guess is that the youth are really engaged online, right? As we already know, right? In
Right.
terms of they're scrolling the screen all the time. But what's interesting, or what interests me, is that why that many people come out? And I still honestly couldn't figure it out either. Like, you can send out message, but why would people come out and get on board? But some classic social movement theory would explain it through resource mobilization,
Mhm.
right? So these people are younger people. They have less burden or less things that they have to worry about. So you can just pick up and come out, right, to the protest.
When you said resource mobilization, do you mean money, finance?
Not just that, also time. Time is
Time.
also a resource, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so the key point of resource mobilization is that not all angry people have the resource to come out,
Right.
right? That's the key, and they try to explain why people don't come out if there's such resource constraint, be it time, money,
Mhm.
right? This type of thing.
So having the anger, for the lack of a better term, having the anger is the main motivation. You are triggered about something, you
Yeah.
feel injustice, so you want to come out, do something about it. However, you have to go to work, you have to go to school, you can't afford the bus ride up to Bangkok, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But this movement, at least in Bangkok, right, and the angry people, the people who feel injustice are the students and office workers living in Bangkok.
Yeah.
So they have more time to come out, especially when the protests usually start around 4 or 5 p.m.
Yeah, and the location, right?
And the locations are all city center.
Yeah.
So these are all strategically planned to make it more convenient
Yeah.
for protests to happen.
Yeah, and the part of it being flash mob,
Right.
I think it plays into that strategy as well, right? You don't have to invest that much time, and in terms of the dealing with the government, right? Flash mob is, once the government starts to do something, you can already
Yeah, you're done.
disperse, right?
Yeah,
We're
you
done.
disperse.
Let's go home.
But this is a very good point because, as you may be well familiar, there's a lot of conspiracy theory over how the students, or not just the student, the Ratsadon movement, able to organize a protest so quickly, getting people down in the streets so quickly. It must have some very, very big, very strong, very deep in the pocket financial backing to be able to do all of these things. But it seems like what you are saying is that it's not the financial matter, it's time,
Oh yeah.
opportunity,
Oh yeah.
convenience. That's how they are able to mobilize.
Yeah. If you look at the movement of the Ratsadon movement compared to the Gopawaso, I bet it could be done a lot cheaper nowadays, right?
Yeah.
They don't have stage like the Gopawaso did,
Uh-huh.
right? They don't have much of
They don't have big
What?
amplifiers,
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
Yeah, so it could be done cheaply, it could be done quickly, right? You could just set up and be like, hey, we'll meet here, right? And people start talking, people start coming out. And
Well, if I may, it's being done like that, not by their choice. It's because the government have disallowed them to bring big amplifiers,
That's also true.
to build big stages.
Yeah.
I mean, they're keeping a watch on that. In fact, usually when they have a protest, the Ratsadon activists will try to bring in the truck with the big
Yeah.
loudspeakers, but then the police will stop the truck, they'll let them in, so they ended up with just a megaphone,
yeah.
which is in contrast to the yellow shirt movement that they can bring,
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
bring anything and build any stage. So yeah, everything is much easier nowadays because we live in a world of social media and there are so many gadgets, and of course Facebook Live. It's
Mhm.
easy to disperse the information.
Yeah.
Having said all that, they can do the flash mob every day, all day, and twice on Sunday. What's next? These things are obviously not enough for the movement to actually achieve their goals. Or is it enough?
That's what I kept asking. What's next? I honestly do not see, what the next step. Whether it is, well, obviously, going through their demands, that
Right.
would be their plan,
Right.
But in terms of tangible plan, I still couldn't see what it is.
But there's a ceiling to a social media revolution, right?
Yes.
You can only go so far on the digital space. Eventually you have to hit the streets, and you have hit the streets, but then you can only go so far in the streets.
Mhm.
Something has to give, something has to happen. So if we go back to the other social media revolution, Arab Spring, something gave. And that thing was when the military break with the government. Maybe not the entire military, but certainly factions within the military. That's why we have civil war, still having civil wars in places like Libya, Syria. In Egypt, there was a coup d'etat, and the coup leader become the president, and then they had an election, and the coup leader become the president again, but without the 250 junta appointed senators. That distinction has to be made. Hong Kong, it seems like the protesters are going up, not seems like, it's the fact that they're going up against the Beijing regime, which controls the largest army in the world. Something has to give, I don't know what. Now in Thailand, what is that something that has to give? We have to wait and see. However, what is going on right now in these recent weeks, again, going back on social media, there has been a pushback by pro-government supporters or royalists, or some say information operations (IO) allegedly operated by the army. Every day on social media, on Twitter, a month ago, 2 months ago, they were only trending hashtags supporting the pro-democracy movement. But recently, every day, top trending hashtags would be hashtags that are obviously from the other side. Today, for example, hashtag Thanathorn, not in support of Thanathorn, but against Thanathorn. Hashtag like เราไม่เอาพรรคล้มเจ้า We do not want the political party that wants to overthrow the monarchy. Okay, those are aggressive hashtags, but also some softer hashtags like เรารักเมืองไทยวิเศษ something like that. We love Thailand, the unique country. Because after all, we believe Thailand is a very unique country. And hashtags about the king, inspiring love, so on and so forth. What do you make of this social media pushback? When I talk to the activists of the Ratsadon and those who support them, everyone always go, it's just IO. It's just the army. Don't pay any attention. What do you think?
Fun fact that in order for a hashtag to be trending, it doesn't take into account of numbers of people who are engaged in those conversations. In fact, it's about the activity that's occurring at that certain period of time.
Right.
It's run through with the algorithms, right? So therefore, just because a certain hashtag is trending doesn't mean that people actually engage in it, if that makes sense.
Oh, but I'm an analog man.
You mean as in it doesn't matter how many tweets, it doesn't mean there are a lot of tweets, but it means that people are talking about that thing at that time, right
Yes.
now.
So
Okay.
like during that time period that the Twitter like screenshot or screen cap
Right.
that time period, if a lot of people collectively use that hashtag only in that specific time, right? Then the hashtag will jump up into the trend, right?
Okay.
But
It doesn't mean that the people support that hashtag.
yes, or that people actually engage in that hashtag in an objective way or in the you know what I mean, right? So, but so in terms of calling all that as an IO, right? Entirely informational operation, it's quite believable, but I don't know if you could dismiss the effectiveness of IO, right? Of course, you know, for more liberal side, more liberal youths, right? They feel like they have this digital literacy, this media literacy enough to not believe the operations, right? But there's still a lot more people, older people, right? Or, you know, not politically correct, but, you know, a little bit lower in terms of literacy or media literacy people that would actually believe that.
Okay.
Right? Regardless of whether how hard the liberal, the youth trying to verify that and show them that, hey, this is wrong, this is IO, right? They know that, but they still will believe it because it complies with their existing beliefs.
Well, this is interesting. How do we know if an account is IO? Just because it's new, does that mean it's IO? Or are we just
Account
dismissing?
names. Account
The
handles.
account names, because I mean, to be honest, the Thai IO are not very tech savvy.
Well,
They're very easy to spot. I think.
They're quite silly.
now,
the things that they do.
let's argue this point. Let me be the let me be the devil's advocate again, which I like to be. Account names are account names. I've been on Twitter for a long time. I don't really tweet because, again, I'm an analog man, but I like to observe, I like to learn things, and it's normal for users to have just whatever account names that they can just make up. And I follow quite a few very popular account names that belong to the Ratsadon side, and these again, they are names that people just make up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So why can't the other side do the same thing? Why can't the government supporters just have any names without being dismissed as being IO?
Well, don't get me wrong, IO happens on both sides.
Fair enough.
Just because, you know, it's just being exposed more often if it's done through from the government side, right?
Okay, but then I mean we take it to understand that the IO from the government side are literally army personnel being told
Yes.
to create the account.
Yes.
You know, the military conscript, for
Yes.
example, even the raw doll, the raw doll, what's the raw doll showing?
It's a high school student who don't want to have to.
Go through military service.
Yeah,
Right.
Then they have to take this military thing.
high school military course, right? The raw doll. The rumors have it that they are also being told
Being
to
recruited to do that.
do the account now. If you're saying that the Ratsadon side also have IO, then who is instigating the IO?
I don't know. I'm not sure. It could be anybody, right? Because
Right.
it's Twitter, it's internet. It could be anyone.
Okay, so anyone
Right.
can just create an account to
Yeah.
support, right? So if I sympathize with
Okay,
Ratsadon,
so, well, sorry.
go ahead,
but
sorry.
when you call it IO, right, it doesn't mean that it has to be fake information, right? Even if you use, you know, truth or say if you use certain narrative and you keep pushing it, right, for people to believe it, in a way that's also already information operations.
Right.
Right, but the way that people think of information operations tend to be fabricated story or fake news and things like that, right? But it's not necessarily true.
So I can be an alleged army IO, but what I post may be true.
Yeah.
You might disagree with it, you might dislike it, but it may be true. But
Yeah.
it's
Same way with the
Right.
pro-democracy side.
but in this war of information operations, do you believe that both sides post content that may be untrue in order to inspire their own side and also discredit the other side?
Of course. it happens even in like
Mhm.
campaigns in the US, right? I
Right.
mean, this is also another kind of campaign, right? So of course it has to be back and forth like that, like you just mentioned.
So basically, it's a war propaganda,
Oh yeah.
which is different from 2014 when, as I understand it, the Opposol was doing the social media propaganda, but the government weren't actually pushing back on social media at the time, because at the time it was a more open space, there were more freedom of speech, so on and so forth. But these days, the government have a firm grip on what's going on social media, and they are attacking back. Now, you said earlier that they are not very good at it. Why do you say that?
She was also agree that they're not very good at it for multiple reasons.
Okay, for
Right.
example?
For example, the language that they use,
Uh-huh.
pretending to be, you know, the pro-democracy side,
Right.
and then once again the youth, you know, kind of expose them,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes they would leave the code, their operation code
Okay.
in the tweet or in the message.
I see.
That's just like my student in
Just-
America trying to hire someone to write the essay for them and then leave the notes in the essay as they submit it. It's kind of like that.
So perhaps military conscripts are not really into it.
It's either that or they're just not savvy enough to actually go through with it.
But perhaps they may not have been very successful in trying to sabotage the other side. But from my observation, it seems that they have been quite successful in creating a narrative, right? And that narrative is, again, we are all familiar with this, reform equals overthrow. The youth movement, the children are innocent, but they are ignorant, they are misled, they are being corrupted. By who? By Thanathorn Jururunkit, the progressive movement, and a global conspiracy to overthrow the Thai kingdom and make Thailand a puppet of the US in this geopolitical warfare against China.
By
Is
the
an-
liberal professors.
And it's a story, it's a narrative. But the fact of the matter is, this narrative has been catching on. I mean, if we talk among people who are sympathizers of democracy, it sounds ridiculous, right? Because we all sing the same song. But if you talk to people who are the quote-unquote Palangir, silent majority, and especially the loyalists, they believe this is true. So in a sense, it's this information warfare, which doesn't exist just on social media, but everywhere, right? On TV, a certain TV station, which is going through change right now. And we all know which one that is. On TV, on the royal stage, or from the mouth of the senators, from the mouth of members of parliament like Kun Phaibull Nititawan, Kun Voranai Vanijaka, Kun Surachanee, which the Ratsadon side to them sound all ridiculous, but maybe they sound exactly correct, credible, and truthful to the other side. And then also this concerted campaign on social media. All this noise, is it effective when you judge the whole package in this propaganda information warfare as a pushback against Ratsadon and making the Palangir, the silent majority, really believe that this is about the monarchy?
Oh, it's really effective. It's really effective. Just like how the pro-democracy narrative resonates well with the younger people, liberal people, right? It works the same way, right? It plays this propaganda model, this propaganda, strategy, always play with people's mind, right? It's our basic instinct to believe whatever that fits well with our pre-existing belief, right? And so I don't think either side care as much to educate or to make the other side believe their narrative. All they need to do is to make sure that people on their side believe what they're saying.
So it's to reinforce
Yes.
their own side, motivate their own side, keep them motivating so they are passionate that when you want them on the street, they will come out on the street. When you want them to vote, they will come out to vote.
Yeah.
This played out exactly like the US elections.
Yes. Yes.
So there's nothing unique about it
No.
in the Thai context. It's the same game that has been played for decades and for centuries, preaching the propaganda to your own followers.
It's our psychological fallacy and it works every time.
Okay, but it works if at the end of the game it can be decided at the voting booth. So whoever has more wins. Majority rule minority, right? That's the way democracy goes. However, here's where the context is special, unique in and of Thailand itself, right? The next election is in 3 years, which might still be forever, given who's in charge. I mean, General Prayut. In 3 years, and unless the constitution is amended, there will be the 250 senators. But to get that constitution amended, the Ratsadon, at least in my opinion, could use a lot more support from the public, could use a lot more of the silent majority to come over. Because when you want change, you must create demand. And that demand, however potent it is, depends on the numbers. And that is true in the history of every single protest anywhere in the world. You need the numbers to pressure the parliament, to pressure the government. In that context, do you think that Ratsadon might want to change their narrative a little bit to be less combative, or do they not think so?
I think they need to dial down on the demands a little bit if they want to bring in more the silent majority. That's for sure. But see, I don't know. Maybe that's not their goal to begin with, right? So I guess that's also the question that we need to ask them.
But by down,
who would be their potential next audience, right? Next target.
Next audience. Okay,
right?
that's a good way to
Since
put
they
it.
already, brought in this young generation, right? But statistically speaking or demographically speaking, we're heading toward aging society.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of old people that we need to get on board. And I mean, that's something they need to consider.
So by down, just to be frank, is to not pursue the monarchy reform, right? Because that's the point of contention, because many of the silent majority and many of the royalists, they don't mind getting Prayut out. They don't mind changing the constitution. In fact, they support it. But when it comes to monarchy reform, even though, having said that, to have an actual democracy, there needs to be monarchy reform. I mean, that's not the question. But again, in the context of Thailand, there's a lot of history and baggage involved.
Passion and love.
Passion and love, again. When we talk about information, propaganda, social values, cultural mindset, is passion and love and hate and so on and so forth. Now, I have spoken to, I want to say a few, but it's not a few, to Man Kasarawi, because we interviewed her. And I asked her point blank, would you down the monarchy reform? And she's quite adamant. She said, no, this is our demand. And I respect that. I can respect that. I can admire that. We don't have to agree on every single thing. But, I understand where she's coming from, where the movement is coming from. Now, if they are still adamant about it,
which makes sense.
Which makes sense in a democratic sense. But
from their strategy perspective.
From their strategy. But from the expanding the demographic, finding a new audience, which is, a part of any communication campaign. That it will be quite difficult, is it not?
If they don't want to dial down, totally understandable from the strategy perspective, right? Both sides, both the government side and the movement side at this point should not concess, right? Even from the game theory, nerdy, sorry.
No, it's okay, I studied game theory, I know the game theory,
the game theory.
I almost failed, but I learned a bit.
So, I mean, it doesn't make sense for either one of them right now to concess, right? Therefore, we're in this political stalemate, but that's off tangent. Right? But, so, in terms of strategy, it doesn't make sense for them to concess or to dial it down. But it depends on what they want to achieve, right? Is it just the short-term goal of bringing more people in, or do they want it to achieve some sort of political change? Right. If they want to get that far, into their goal, then they'll have to do something different.
Well, at the moment, it seems both sides are quite confident. Yesterday or the day before, there was a briefing by the National Security Council, whatever, and the conclusion basically was the protest is dying down, they're becoming exhausted, there are only maybe 10,000-20,000 people at a protest at most, compared to possibly up to 100,000 a couple of months ago. That's why General Prayut has been able to smile for the first time in months. It seems like he feels better about things because that's what his people report to him. Mm-hmm. So on that side, it seems they are quite confident, right? And the yellow shirts are more emboldened. They have become more aggressive with the attack on, not attack, that's a strong word, with the attempting to address, to confront Thanathorn Junnunrungkit in his campaigning in Nakhon Si Thammarat. Although the wrong car, and I believe there were 5 ladies in that car. Yes. But in any case, things like that happen. But it seems like the government side the Prayut is more emboldened. The yellow shirts are more emboldened. They are more motivated. They are becoming more and more aggressive. And the Ratsadon side, they are still confident, and even though the protests are not in as much frequency as before, it has become a staple of Thailand's life and Bangkok's life. It's not just in Bangkok, it's in all the major provinces. How long can we keep this up?
That's funny because that's what I actually wrote on my note.
How long? Here. So you don't have the answer either. You're not the oracle. You're a professor, not the oracle.
But two folds here. So
right.
Number one, the government has a very reason to be confident with their capability. We're technically dealing with the mini China right now.
Okay.
Right. In terms of although they do a lot of silly things, right? Maybe that's their kind of their cover. Trying to.
Oh, you mean they're purposely being stupid?
Yes, there's just
stupidity by design.
I don't know, trying to be positive here.
Right.
But maybe this is their play, right? This is their there may be a lion wearing sheepskin, right? Trying to do silly things a little bit, right?
Okay.
But they know once they have to act, that they have the capacity and have the capability to do so. Right. Therefore, should there come to that situation,
right,
they know that they would and they are going to do something, right? So, I mean, in that sense, they have every right to be confident.
Well, we could see development come next week because Parliament will discuss constitutional amendment, and yes, to discuss again to discuss. They've been discussing it for a very long time, but at least discussion is still going. And if you may recall, General Prayut himself said that by December there will be a step towards constitutional amendment. But of course, he said many things. So this situation will continue to go on for at least the time being. Now, Kun Chon, you have questions, I believe.
Yeah, can we start with my question first? We don't really have any other questions from the comment section.
Okay.
We have one comment that I would like to read later, but I have one question first.
Okay.
So circling back to the dialing down. So in order to get older people on board, right? You mentioned that we might have to stop the discussion about the monarchy reform. Do you think, apart from that, are there any other ways to die down but still being able to touch on the monarchy topic still?
I don't think that you have to scratch it off entirely, but the way that you frame it is really important as well, right? The way that you approach it, the way that you frame things, right? Because, and also I think there's some development or improvement in terms of how the movement's trying to frame that demands as well. They're trying to make this narrative that, reformation is not equal to abolishment, right? But that's going to take time for older people to understand that, right? To see the picture of what's the difference then. If you want to reform, might as well get rid of it, right? That might be what they're thinking, and they don't want that to happen, right? I don't think I'm not necessarily talking about getting rid of the third demands per se, but just need to readjust a little bit so that it's easier to swallow.
Is it down to communication techniques? Frame
Yeah.
the wording or reframe the wording?
less ก้าวร้าวอย่างเงี้ย
Less ก้าวร้าว I know you don't like that.
Same cringing.
You love being ก้าวร้าว You love being
I mean,
aggressive.
I would love to keep the third demand. That's why I'm asking this question, because it's a way for us to meet in the middle at all. That's why, yeah.
Yeah, and also another thing that I also ask my student in class as well, in terms of monarchy as institutions, right? People are more into personalistic way of thinking about this particular institution, right? So what I ask them is that, so you want to you want to reform
Careful there.
the monarchy as an institution,
Right.
or is it because of the person, right? Same goes with, you could ask the same question with conservatives or royalists, that is it the institution per se, or is it the person?
Well, the answer may be very interesting. I can say right now for the Ratsadon movement, I don't mean to speak on their behalf, but I've spoken to some of the key activists. It is to reform the institution because it's not about any one person. However, interestingly enough, if you ask some of the royalists, it's more about the person. So again, going back to the wording and communication. Earlier you said it's about who's your audience, right? If you want to expand your audience, who's your target audience? And for example, like Sean, you're 27 and you are a person of your generation in every bit, right? So what resonates with you would be that language, the strong language.
Careful there.
I'm making a hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
So it resonates with you, right? Because you're young. But if your audience is the older generation that you want to compromise with and meet halfway, then it's a different way of speaking to them. So it depends on your audience, right?
Yeah.
Like we do a media platform, we have to know what our audience is and how to speak to them.
I guess it's go the same way as how the government has been speaking to us a little bit differently recently, and how their social media strategy and stuff has been changing recently as well. Do you think that would be the same sort of concept that they're also trying to communicate to us?
Great observation. I don't know if it's
Intentional.
I don't know if it's intentional. No, it's intentional. I mean, and this is a thing that I have no facts or evidence behind this, but of course it's a thing that is known among insiders and journalists with source that whenever the government really want to do something and come to understand something, 2 months ago they might not understand social media. Now they understand better. And the reason they understand better is because they have the resource and the wealth to bring in help, the real experts, the true experts who are actually specialists at this. And I think what we are seeing now is a really big step up in the social media campaign from the side of the government, and that is possibly because they have learned to adapt and they have seek help and they have had that help. So it will be very interesting going forward where this battle will lead. The old guys are catching up to the young people in social media.
Yeah.
Any more questions, Sean?
I mean, yeah, like if I may mention about the Sunday evening outing of His Royal Majesty sometime happens, and then you would see by fire. Like the banner, the light banner, like when you would go to a concert, like when you would go to a K-pop concert or whatever, the audience would start to show the sign, the banners with lights. I feel like that's also trying to communicate to a younger generation, or am I thinking into it too much?
It could be. I mean, it's what young people do.
Yeah, it's what the young people do. Yeah.
K-pop stars and idols, and they do it at Ratsadon protest, and why not the other generation do it at the Royal Walkabout, which is also quite unprecedented. So again, I mean, from both sides, everybody is stepping up that game.
Yeah.
And right now the game is who can best communicate in order to
Get
persuade
audience.
Yeah.
or reinforce their own side. But I think the next step, the reinforcing has been done.
Yes.
Right? If you're Ratsadon, you're going to stick with that. You're not going to change. If you're Royalist or pro-youth, you're going to stick with that. You're not going to change. The game is who can inspire or persuade the quote-unquote silent majority and add numbers to their side. Because again, eventually it will have to come to the voting booth. Eventually it will have to be decided in the election. 250 senators or not.
Interesting. Okay, I have one question from Jasper.
Right.
The older people that I have contact to in the north and the northeast really are more concerned about the economy and the present level of depression. I am wondering why the protesters are not more clearly talking about inequality and integrating the economic issues in order to reach out.
I can answer that because I've been to every protest. And actually, last night I had dinner with a group of gentlemen from the older generation who sympathize with the cause of the Ratsadon movement, but they also mentioned, incidentally, they have the very same question: why don't the Ratsadon movement expand more to talk about economic inequality, so on and so forth? But at least here's my observation for what it's worth. If you actually go to the protest itself, and the way it is done is anybody can grab the mic and start speaking, right? And people break off into different groups. Actually, a lot of the speeches are done by the people who are economically affected in a negative way. I'm talking students from the province studying here in Bangkok. I'm talking working class individuals. I'm talking motorbike taxi. I'm talking unemployed people. And they grab the mic to speak about the economy. And they speak more about the economy than about democracy, than about the other issues that is within the party demands. To them, the problem is more personal, and it's right there. However, it's very difficult to frame these things into the core demands. Am I correct? You are the professor here, right? The demands have to be easily digestible.
Yeah.
Right? Just get out.
Yeah. I guess that's what you mentioned is also true, and also I think, and also again, I don't speak for the Ratsadon, right? But I think the reason why they frame their three demands that way is because at least among the movement leaders,
right,
they feel like this economic issues, all this existing grievance that we have in this country comes from structural problems.
Right.
And in order to fix that structural problems, you have to deal with these three demands first, right? So unless you can fix the structural problem, you're not going to fix the economic problem or inequality, which, by the way, Thailand has ranked number 4 in the world in income inequality.
Right. So income inequality is a symptom of a real problem, and you can't cure the symptoms. Right? You have to actually go right at the problem, and that is in the constitution. Because what it really is a protest to demand constitutional amendment or rewrite.
Yeah.
Monarchy reform is just a part of that because everything is in the constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to carry on with the economic discussion, again, I have had discussions with investors and brokers and so on and so forth, and everybody seems to agree things will get worse economically if Thailand continues the way we are on the path we have been walking on. Next year, SME will suffer, bank will take over, so on and so forth. So perhaps by next year, this economic issue will become a much more reality, and then it can be picked up easier by the Ratsadon movement. What do you think?
I think a little differently.
Go ahead.
So I think the more affected people become, right, because of the economic downtrend and things like that, it could go both ways. Actually, not entirely disagree with you,
right,
but it could go both ways, right? People might, especially people, Bangkokians, right? They might think that this is due to the political stalemates and inconveniences caused by the Ratsadon's protest,
right,
and therefore become more resistance against them.
Okay. So again, it goes back to who controls the narrative.
Right.
Because that's the government's narrative right now.
Mm-hmm.
The economy is bad because one, COVID, to the protest. According to the other side, the economy is bad because of you, Riyut.
Yeah.
So again, we go back to
Yeah.
narrative,
Yeah.
which will start in social media and still into the street. Are we good, John?
Just say one more comment, not so much a question, an observation from Jamie. The government propaganda is so weak, so obvious. It's astonishing that the yellow shirts / royalists actually believe it. They must know and therefore accept these lies. Do you think they know that this propaganda is actually propaganda?
If it complies with their existing belief, it's really hard to
I'm a
tease
professor.
that out.
I'm a professor also, and I teach political communication at Thammasat. So we might have a war between July and Thammasat. But we have to define what propaganda is. Propaganda is simply a method of sending a political message. It's neither good nor bad. It's simply a tool, right? So whatever the political message is propaganda, and it's done by the government, it's done by Ratsadon, it's done by whoever wishing to send a political message. Now, again, to people on the other side, when you see all this government propaganda, and you look at them, it's like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. This is so weak. How can anybody believe this? Of course, we believe that because we believe the other side.
Yeah.
But to the royalists, this is brilliant. This is true. This is the fact because that's what they want to believe. And again, it's about what you want to believe. In politics, it's never about the truth. It's about what you can convince people to believe.
Yep. Anything but truth.
Exactly.
Right. Cool. No more. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you definitely not tomorrow, next week, Monday.
All right.
Thank you very much.